This will be a video on making a video, and specifically recording gutting a lock. I found trying to do recording a gut to be one of the more stressful and difficult aspects of lock sport. Disassembling a lock can be tricky, and then having the added stress of trying to record it at the same time just amplifies that so much more. There are things you have to pay attention to. You don't want to have the lock leave the frame. I've accidentally put the lock down outside the frame, and then that's it. You got to start the recording over and pick it all over again. I've accidentally put my hand in front of the lock. It's leaving the frame. You have to be mindful of what you are doing through the whole process. Kind of one of the places to start is the mount for your camera. I tried a tripod and a smaller one on the desk. That didn't work out too great because it's really hard to change view. I tried this smaller gooseneck. Doesn't have the length for it. There are ones out there that are longer, so someone may have good luck with those. I decided to go with this type of arm. I got this one for about $16. They'll have a variety of different attachments for the camera mount. I prefer the style that grips around the short side of the phone as opposed to this, which is the long side. They usually have a cup on the top of this screw here for clamping down, but I don't have much of a lip on here, so I pulled it off, and this goes directly against the wood. It does end up pretty much poking a hole into the wood, but I don't mind so much, and it keeps it very stable, whereas with the cup it would slide out very easily. Second concern is lighting. I've got ceiling lamps, this one desk lamp here, and then the second one here. This one was about 20 bucks. It's very easy to redirect it, put the light pretty much wherever I want. You want to keep your work area relatively clean. My desk used to be a mess, and it just complicated things because I'm competing with the junk to try to have enough room to actually move stuff around and have a clear area for picking and then for gutting. So it's a very good idea to just try to keep things clean. And to aid in that, having shelving helps immensely. All this stuff would be scattered across the table, whereas now it only takes up the small area that the bottom shelf does. And instead, I've got multiple, it's a space multiplier. One thing I didn't think about until I was well into things was simply my chair height. I use the same chair both here and at my computer. And at the computer, the keyboard's right about here. So this having the chair all the way down ends up being a comfortable height at the computer. And I would just roll it over here and start working on locks. But it ends up putting my arm out at an angle like this. And I found that awkward, especially while gutting. And it didn't even occur to me until many videos in that I could just raise my chair. It was particularly awkward because having the arm come out and the phone's here, there's not much space here as far as being able to see the screen and what the camera sees and having a place to work. And plus just, move my head so I could see around the camera if I needed to. Having the chair all the way up, now my arms are more at a right angle. I have freedom to move them in and out. There's more space for the camera to come up and get more of a wider view of the work area and the lock. Just have my arms like this, so much more comfortable. And that goes a long way for being able to do a successful gut. Pinning mat. I bought this to use for soldering, and it was before I started lock sport. I would have picked a different one. This one's okay. I would recommend getting one that has this kind of lip all the way around the perimeter. This is just flat. So you want this kind of raised edge all the way around the perimeter, so that when you're gutting, if you accidentally drop some pins, they'll be retained by the wall that runs around the mat, and then they don't go rolling off your desk onto your lap and into your carpet or wherever else. And it's no fun trying to chase those and track them down. I haven't really been using this with my videos because it was buried under stuff, but now I got it cleaned out. I will be using this from this point forward. I am considering replacing it with one with a lip, because I do drop pins, not infrequently. These are about $15 to $20. You can get specific pinning mats, and they'll have recesses in them, cutouts like this. Some of them will also duplicate as a pinning tray, so that can be pretty handy. I actually like some of the ones out there that are specifically silicone soldering mats. They're decent sized. They don't have specific cutouts for lock sport, but many of the ones have recesses like this that can be pretty useful. And I like to have a pinning tray that I can kind of move around anyway, so having a separate pinning tray works. So I designed my own with aspects that I wanted. I've got 7 rows. When I pick, I have the front of the lock is to the right. So since pin 1 is always here, when I'm picking, I want the tray to mimic that. So I have pin 1 on the right. Got a row for grub screws, if any, springs, driver pins, key pins, and then there's a sidebar or anything like that. Got an extra row here. And then I also designed up a storage cabinet with trays. So these will sit here. You can have 2 here at a time. You can gut it, and then say you're going to be grubbing it or doing something else with it. You can then transfer all the pins into here and then throw it into the tray. I've already got a few in here like that. There's one lock. If you're progressive pinning, it's very handy to have them in here. And, they're not going anywhere. Tweezers. I like these. These are the reverse tweezers. So they start out closed, and then squeezing them opens it. And therefore, it retains the pin. I just find these so much easier to deal with, because I never know when my muscles kind of just let go. Means I'm more likely to drop something, but it also, if I was squeezing this to keep the pin, if I let go, boom, I not only do lose the tweezers, I lose the pin. Whereas this way, I'm retaining the pin until just either drop it into the tray, drop it back into the cylinder, what have you. Another good thing is a gut wrench. These are for taking off spring clips and such that are on the back of the locks. This is sold by Sparrows, designed by Lock Noob. You're going to also want some followers. These are ones that are based on Crispic's design. I kind of redid it from scratch in Fusion 360 because I wanted something parametric rather than just use his STL. I came up with a fresh one. I have to reprint up a new set. I'm going to redo these rather than having a flat backside, which really isn't terribly useful. I'm going to have the V-cut shape. If that was a V, you'd have it oriented vertically, and let's say this is the housing of a lock. You can put the pin in, and then the V will center it over the spring for you. And then you can push it down with your tweezers. For the other side, I have the spiral there, and these are very handy for showing orientation on things like gins and Christmas trees. So you would rotate it so this extended part is over the pin, and then you slowly rotate it, and the pin will come out of the hole, and then you'll be able to see the gin lip. And then you can take it out with your tweezers, and then rotate it back down to that, and then you bring it down to the next one, and then just rinse and repeat. They're also handy for putting them back in if you have hand trimmers like I do. With the tweezers, I can put the pin under the round part, goes in the hole against the spring, and then I just push it up underneath the round part, and then the spring just holds it up against that, and then you just do it the opposite way you brought it out. You just put it like that, and it just slowly pushes it down into the hole, and now it's covered. And then you can bring it forward, and then just do the next hole. I designed these parametrically so that if some new oddball size comes up, I can just redo them, which is what happened. So this is 10 millimeters, 12.6 millimeters, and 14 millimeters. And then I got this Nagasaga Kodai. I just changed the parameters to 12 millimeter diameter, and I printed out a new plug holder and follower. And these will just snap into there, just stay put. You can put the core in there, makes it easy for taking pins in and out, and there's enough height there that you can also have the key in the core. And then I have this backstop there, so things like Euro cylinders, they don't flop over. You want shims. There are people who get by without them. I don't recommend it, especially once you start getting up to some high security stuff. There's also sorts of cuts and holes and whatnot that pins can fall into. So it's a good habit to get into and just do it with all your locks. You have the key in, so everything is up at shear, and you just put it in between the key pins and the driver pins, and then use a follower to push the core out. There are videos that kind of go over that. That brings me to access to the pins. I found that important when choosing a lock format. So you can get locks in several different formats. Sometimes they're only available in one, but other times you can choose. The Gold P, you can get it in kick format, key in knob. You can get it as a rim cylinder. The rim cylinder has a Bible cover on top, but it's crimped in. You kind of end up pretty much trying to destroy it if you have to take it out. When I have a choice, I go for one that has at least, I go for the easiest access. So in this case, it's a kick. So you have a kick cover. So you can take a screwdriver, put it under here, and it'll pop off. I had been progressive pinning this, and I didn't want to expose all chambers every time I was taking ones in and out. And this is one I was working on for a couple months. So I was going in there all the time. So like in this case, a couple tabs sticking down. I did bend them up on one side. I don't recommend doing that more than once, if that. If you're just going to be gutting the lock, I would just pop the cover off. The only reason I did this is because I was progressive pinning, but it does make it easy because I can just slide the end off, just making sure to keep my finger over that end chamber. And now I have access to that. And I pull the spring out. And, so it was progressive pinning from whichever end I was doing it from. I would put the cover on so that I would have access to the rows that were left empty. One format I want to bring up is SFIC, small format interchangeable core. These have keys that you use to open it, and then there's also what they call control keys, which if you put it in and turn it, it'll only turn part way, and then it will pull out this steel part here out of this brass housing, and it allows apartment complexes, businesses, whatever, to easily exchange cores if they need to rekey a lock or whatever. They don't have to pull the whole lock out. They don't have to try to key it right there. They can just swap the core out. You know, if there's a new resident or whatever, they can repin the core at their leisure. You can get blue if you can pick to one of the shear lines, either control or open, and you can get purple if you can pick to both of them. Now, purple isn't an issue because if you pick to control, you can pull this out even if you don't have the key, and then you can see at the bottom of the cylinder there are holes for each pin chamber, and you'll be able to show the pins in there. The core itself isn't guttable without some expensive tools. The problem is you can't use one like this for blue. It's in the housing, and I don't have a control key for it. So I can't take this out. It'll only count for blue is if I can pick it to control, and that happens to be the one I hit, and then I could pull it out and show the pins. If I pick this to open, I don't get anything for it because I can't show the hole. So I do not recommend getting these for blue. Actually, I don't recommend for belts in general. Euro cylinders, let's talk about those. They're called Euro cylinders because they're used in Europe. And they use a different orientation than in North America. So in North America, we mount them like this, our locks. Bible is up, and in Europe, these are all mounted like that. See, the text is orientated that direction. There is a good reason for having Bible up. If any water gets into the lock, it doesn't really get on the pins. It just drips down to the bottom here and either runs out of the lock. If it's orientated like this, the water will go in, go into the pin chambers. Any junk or anything that goes in there goes into the pin chambers, gum up the driver pins, gums up the springs. Yeah, actually, I think it's smarter to have it this way. There are different formats. That's a full, that's a half, and this is a cut. Sometimes people refer to this as a half a cylinder, but it's a cut half cylinder. This is technically a half cylinder. This one is, both sides aren't populated. Normally it would be. This would have a cam like this in it. Sometimes both interior and exterior will have keyed cylinders like this. Sometimes the interior will just be a deadbolt turn. So I don't actually have an uncut, fully populated one. A lot of times when you have a full cylinder like this, if both are populated with keyed cylinders, you've got two locks. So a lot of people just cut it right through the mounting hole. What I like to do is actually cut them flush. So I'll cut it through there and then cut it again through there. So it'll end up like this. These are much easier to gut than these when both sides are populated. You need a shoe, segmented followers. I actually haven't done one. I don't plan on it. What I usually do is I cut them. You don't always get two of the same lock, even if both are keyed cylinders. If it's keyed, it will be keyed the same, but you're not guaranteed to have the same security measures in them. If it's just pins, then yeah, you might end up with spools on both sides. With many of them, they will not put the security features on the interior side. So you can end up with barrels and a sidebar on one side, and then you'll just have no sidebar and standard pins on the interior side. So do your research. Don't expect to get two for one when you buy a full cylinder. Some cases, yes. Some cases, no. And then you have ones like this it's a half cylinder. There is no interior interaction with the lock. One of the easiest ways to get access to pins is Grub Screws, set screws. These are actually, you're not setting anything, so this would be Grub Screws because they're like grubs. They're slightly they're kind of under the surface. Medico, most Medico formats have Grub Screws already in them. So one of the first things I usually do if I get a Euro cylinder, if it's a full, I'll cut it down to two halves, two cut halves, and then I disassemble the lock. I have to do it the standard way, pulling the clips off, and then came up with a grubbing jig. This is brass rod. Steel rod would be more durable. So once you have it all apart, like this, jig. You look through the hole, make sure the hole's lined up with one of the plugs. I rounded off one of these ends so it's just a little bit easier to insert. Put the rod in, then you put this in a vise and squeeze the two ends, and it'll drive that plug down through the Bible, and then it'll just pop out into this empty cylinder chamber. And you just repeat for each of those. And then you cap the hole. So it's going to be around a 3mm. It's a brass housing, so you don't really need to drill it out anymore. I already owned a 3.5mm 0.6 tap, so I was using this. But then I discovered trying to find 3.5mm grub screws is almost impossible. Luckily, I discovered number 6-40 are the same, almost identical. They're a little bit off, but it's going in brass, so the threads will conform to the screws fine without cross-threading or stripping. If you don't own a tap yet, I'd get the number 6-32. If you already have a 3.5mm, and just get the number 640. Here's one I did earlier. So that's my SS600 with Shims. And then you just use 1.5mm hex driver. And then you can just dump the pin stack out if you want. And it's just so much easier than any other form of gutting. Bible covers aren't bad, but this lets you do one at a time. Drivers. With the hex heads, I don't want to be swapping bits back and forth and all that. I felt it worthwhile to get a set of hex drivers specifically. With discrete drivers, I can just pick up the one I want. I don't have to worry about swapping bits. One other tool I wanted to mention, it's not something I use often in lock sport, but if you do have hand issues and find using drivers of any type difficult, this can be pretty nice. It has sensors in it, and it'll change speed based on how much rotation you give it. Throw the bit in, squeeze the button, and it'll change direction based on which way you're turning. And speed. And rechargeable. A little pricey. And on these locks, there's not enough rotation on the Grub Screws to really make it worth the bother. But if you're doing any other kind of work, I love this. Speaking of screws, Go locks. And Miwa, Japanese. These use JIS, Japanese Industrial Standard. They look like Phillips head. They're not. If you use a Phillips head driver in them, pretty good chance you'll strip it, especially if this is the first time that you are taking the screw out. They're in there extremely tight. Phillips heads are meant to cam out, which will often lead to stripping because they were kind of designed for automation. So when you have machines screwing them down, you don't want the driver getting hung up on the screw. So they're meant to cam out, crank them down to a certain amount, release pressure, the driver will pop out of the screw. With the JIS, they're much sharper cut. So these will actually work better even in a Phillips head screw than a Phillips driver will, because they're very sharp cross point. So you'll see cross point also mentioned. A lot of the JIS will have dots on the screws. I don't have any at the moment, but there will be just a little dot right there. If you think it's Japanese and you have what looks like a Phillips, it's not. My recommendation is to get a JIS driver and just use that on all your Phillips. The only thing you have to be careful of is when tightening them. It can be easy to over torque because at a point where a Phillips head might slip, the JIS won't. and you can just keep tightening. So you want to be careful. This is a vessel. It's one White uses as well. I laugh every time I see this. I keep thinking it's 220 watt. So the 220W vessel, and then the number 1 bit is the one you'll be using a lot of times. So it has a number 3 on the other end. That's huge. You'll also get number 2 and the number 6 flat. I guess White likes to use this as a crowbar a lot of times. It is pretty darn tough. And then also included are these kind of odd star-like ones. If you see one that looks like a Phillips head, and then in addition to the thick cross, you see like a very thin additional cross that's like rotated 45 degrees. That's this, the Posi drive. Sounds like a differential to me. These will not work in a Phillips head because of this kind of extra vein on there. I haven't had to use these yet, but apparently some locks do use them. So now we're going to talk about clips. So many will have these kind of brass clips on them. See them a lot on the ASA. Once you take them off, they'll deform. So they're not spring clips. You can reuse them, and then once you put it back on, you can squeeze it back down. They will eventually break, and these will come off. You can use the gut wrench or screwdriver or whatever. There are STLs out there for clips for the 600 and 700. You can use them for others as well. You just 3D print them, and then they break. Cheap enough and easy enough to print some more. And then there's the spring clips. This one has one that's recessed in this cutout. So this can be a real pain to get. Probably use 2 screwdrivers and kind of pry it apart. There are some brands of locks where it's just fully crimped and you'll have to kind of cut the ring in order to get it off. These, with the holes in them, need special pliers. So this is an interior because it's holding it by pressing on the inside. I've been able to put a screwdriver in there and just pry it up and then just bring up one end at a time and work your way around. This one, exterior, is clipped around. It's very much like all the other spring clips, and you'd think I could just put a couple screwdrivers in there, pliers, and work it off. After I picked this, I spent 10 minutes trying to get this damn clip off. And then I just had to give up, and then I bought a pair of these, and then I repicked it. So most pliers are closed, and when you open the handle, it opens the tip. You close the handle, it closes the tip. The type that are used on the internals, you squeeze the handles and the tips separate. I went with Knipex, German brand. I wanted ones that would last. There are different sizes. 10 to 25 is good coverage. I think that'll cover pretty much almost every lock you'll run into. It can be a little tough when the ring is right up against something, because then the tips don't really have a place to go. It can also make it a little bit difficult getting the pliers off the tips, but off the ring. But there. So much easier. Now you could cut it, and then when you're done, you reassemble it. You just put it back on. So see how the ends are sticking through the ring now? I can't get the ring all the way back into the groove. Try to get part of it in the groove, and then I've let go, and it did not want to come out because the tips are kind of going outward, and so you're working against that, trying to pull it out. But now that it is out, I can stamp it down into the groove. So it still can be a little bit tricky, but that was no 10 minutes. I'll just cover lubricants really quick. I had been using fluid film just as a general lubricant. And when I started Locksport, I was using it in the locks as well. But I discovered it's not the best for that. It moved fairly smoothly, but it also was a little bit easier to collect gunk and whatnot. So I do not recommend it as a lock lube. I was really impressed with Houdini. Even like a new lock, sometimes I'll just give it a very light squirt with this, and it could be placebo effect, but I swear it feels smoother afterwards. I've also heard really good things about Tri-Flow. And WD-40, believe it or not, I know there's a lot of talk about how it's not a lubricant, but a couple locksmiths have done tests and they actually found it was actually pretty decent as far as keeping the lock working when it's out in the elements and that kind of thing. We're doing Locksport, we don't have to worry about that aspect of it. This one didn't do quite as well in the long term for dealing with the elements compared to like Tri-Flow, but it does work really well just how we tend to use it. The interesting thing is no petroleum oils, no Teflon, no silicone, no grease, no graphite. I haven't found out what is in it, but I mean, I'm guessing some solvents. It does clean well. It does lubricate well. Tri-Flow does have petroleum oils and it has PTFE, Teflon, and it does have solvents in it, so it will act as a cleaner as well. So Tri-Flow does seem to get top ratings. So if that's your primary concern, that's a good way to go. But I like the Houdini. Works well for me. I have not tried Tri-Flow yet. If you have vision troubles and whatnot and really need to be up close for what you're doing with some of the things, these magnifiers can be pretty handy. And they're inexpensive. They're like 18 bucks, something like that. This one has a light. There are different lenses you can pop in for different magnifications. I don't have to use them for picking or gutting, but for times when if I'm making a challenge lock or something like that, they can come in handy for when I really want to get up close and see, especially with my messed up vision. So something else that can be useful if you have hand tremors are these weighted wrist straps. So just put them on like that. Be all Black Widow. And the extra weight helps absorb the tremor and stabilize your hands. I have used these several times for different things, and they are useful. There's several pockets. These ones I bought are not all populated. You can get them kind of like for various total weights, and basically that's a metal plate. You can kind of customize for how much weight you want on each wrist. So this is the Yale 500. This is the Yale 500 Plus. If you go to buy them, it's kind of a crapshoot of what you're actually going to get. Sometimes you'll see the listing will say Yale 500 Plus, but it'll be a picture of the Yale 500. If you're going to go for a Yale 500, pay attention. If you're going to use it for blue, you want the style where it's the vertical text with the registered trademark symbol on it. This will have the 4 out of 5 chambers will be spools. It will have overmilling on it and a solid core. This has 3 out of 5 are spools. It has flat top core instead of milling, and it has a skeletonized core. As far as I know, this still hasn't been determined yet whether the Plus counts as blue or not. So try to get this one. This video is probably been long enough. So thanks for watching.